Welcome to Grapple Arts Radio.
Hi guys, Stephan Kesting here. I've got another great interview lined up for you today. You're going to find this person really interesting and get a lot of great tips out of it for your own training. I just want to take this opportunity to let you know, or to remind you, about my website, beginningbjj.com. This is a really interesting resource. You get a free book called A Roadmap for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which takes you through all the basic positions and all the basic strategies of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it's all free, and it's all immediately accessible for you as soon as you sign up. So, beginningbjj.com, I highly recommend it. Now let's move on to the interview. Hi guys, I'm here with my friend Emily Kwok. Emily is not only a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, not only has she had some MMA fights and done very well, which is to say she's won. She's got a shelf full of medals from the Mundials and the Pan Ams, gi and no gi, runs her own school, but she's also a friend of mine. And as such, I think she's eminently qualified to discuss a couple of topics. So today, I kind of want to dwell on the larger, stronger opponent, because as a woman, you're going to be dealing with that all the time. And also training as a woman, because it's really something I'm not qualified to talk about.
Really?
Yeah, I promise. As long as those photos from college don't come out, I'm good. So, Emily, why don't you very quickly take us through your jiu-jitsu history, just to give people a bit of a background of where you're coming from.
Sure. I started jiu-jitsu about 10 years ago in Vancouver, my hometown, where you and I met. I started under a blue belt, and really it was kind of by coincidence, I guess, that I stumbled into jiu-jitsu. My trainer, Roy Duquette, was trying to help me find some sort of a sport or something else to help out with my physical fitness, because I was in college. I wasn't really happy with the way I looked or felt, and I tried boxing, I tried just working out at the gym, and I wasn't getting the results. So he'd suggested that I might try some ground fighting, and of course I had no idea what that was.
A lamb to the slaughter.
So I actually started out in a Sambo class. That didn't work out so well, because there were some, very masculine personalities that wanted to teach me how to escape wrist locks for a month, and that got very boring. So I sort of moved on to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That was suggested to me by a classmate, and thought it was really odd and interesting and somewhat thrilling. And at the same time, I saw there was one girl in the class, and I admired the fact that she could pass the guard, which was a new thing to me at the time. And I sort of said to myself, I want to learn how to do that. So I'd started training in a small community center under a blue belt named John Tofanitis. Trained there for a couple months and had moved to New York City over the summer. And when I was in New York, all of my teammates back home had said, look, you gotta look up a Gracie. The Gracies are there. And I had no idea what a Gracie was. And they'd said, Henzo's there. So I looked up Henzo Gracie and tried out his school. And at that time, was a white belt, and stayed there for a few months, got some good fundamentals in, moved back to Vancouver, where I started training with Dennis Kang. And I started training with him because some of my classmates had said, he has excellent technique, he's sort of up-and-coming fighter, you might really enjoy it. So I'd started over there, and that's actually where you and I met, because I remember you used to come in and substitute sometimes.
So that was all no-gi MMA focused?
All no-gi, yeah. And that was new, but it kind of kept me rolling around, and I really enjoyed it. And I stayed with Dennis for about a year and a half until I moved to Japan. Just prior to moving to Japan, I would make frequent trips back to New York, and I received my blue belt under Henzo. I moved to Japan just for a little bit of life experience, and I stayed there for a year, and I trained with Team Paraestra out of Koiwa, which is sort of a city close to Tokyo, or like a suburb of Tokyo, I think it is. It's really big. Under a gentleman named Takashi Ochi. And Takashi was a brown belt at the time under Yuki Nakai. Stayed there for a year, and that's also where I jumped into a little bit of MMA. I've been doing really well on the tournament circuit, and a couple of my friends were promoters in some of the women's fighting organizations over there.
That's a Smack Girl?
Smack Girl. So
yeah. I've got a T-shirt that says Smack Girl, and I wear it around town, and I get some really strange looks.
So one of my really good friends there was this guy named Kinya Hashimoto, who you see him a lot at jiu-jitsu tournaments reporting on what's going on in the jiu-jitsu world for the Japanese. And he was really encouraging and said, Emily, you should fight MMA. You should fight MMA. And I have a sort of motto where I say I'll try anything almost once. So I started taking boxing lessons from an old Japanese guy that I couldn't really understand very well. And, they made extra classes to teach me takedowns and all this kind of stuff. So I ventured into my first amateur fight against a girl that was about 45 pounds bigger than me. She was just round. And I won that fight, at which point Kenya said, we're going to do our first promotion in Korea. And he's like, you should come, we'll make you a pro fighter. And I thought, oh, well, hey, I'm already here. Let's go to Korea. So we went and did Smack Girl in Korea. And mind you, when I heard that the thing was called Smack Girl, I was a little taken aback too. So we went to Korea. I had my first and only professional fight in Korea. Won that by decision and received my purple belt in Japan, moved back to Canada for a few months, and frequented, a lot of the jiu-jitsu gyms that were around at the time. We had Marcus Suarez and there's Tim Shears running Gracie Baja. And I was only there for a few months before I received an opportunity to come back to the United States. And part of the reason why I wanted to come back to the United States was I absolutely loved New York City, and I felt like there was a lot of opportunities for me to grow. And at this point in my career, I really wasn't thinking jiu-jitsu was going to be what it is to me now. It was just a hobby. I was really moving more for life experience. So I moved back and had thought maybe
in your bi-coastal lifestyle.
This total bi-coastal lifestyle. Made myself broke all through my 20s doing this. And I ended up in New Jersey, and I'd taken a job through an old friend working as a creative director for a small event management firm. So we were setting up conferences. I had a very corporate job, and jiu-jitsu was again just a really passionate hobby. But at that time, I had been competing in the United States, and that was a big plus for me because I was a little insecure about my abilities competing in Canada, competing in Japan. Every time I went to competitions, I'd only have a handful of people to fight, and I didn't really know if I was a purple belt. I didn't really know if if I had the skills, So I took the opportunity to start going out to Navas and Grapplers Quest, and I performed really well. And 2007, we had, I was training with Ricardo Almeida at the time, and there was the idea that a group of us would try and go to the Mundials. So I ventured my first year. I was a new brown belt, a couple months old, and we went to the Mundials, and I happened to do really well that year. And so my first shot...
Is that code for gold?
Yeah, that was my gold medal, and that was my first shot at any IBJJF tournament. And it was a brilliant moment that I wish I relished a little bit more, but I don't think I appreciated it at the time. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just went. And at that time I made a transition, and I was offered a job to actually start managing and working in a jiu-jitsu school. And I was a little nervous because I was raised sort of very white collar, and I didn't know if jiu-jitsu would provide me with the type of lifestyle that I wanted. And I thought, really, how well can I do teaching or working in jiu-jitsu? So I decided to take that path for a couple of years, give it a try, and I found very quickly that it would be possible. And at that point, I also started to look around, and I started to see that, well, the reason why there's never anybody to fight when I go to tournaments, or there's always the same one or two people, is because that was just sort of the generation that I was a part of. And we often had to fight absolutes all the time, or we had to fight girls that were all different levels. And
the guys have their weight divisions, and the girls have the girl all weight, all rank division.
Just, you showed up, great. And it would be funny because I'd go to tournaments and guys would complain that they got, bumped up because they were, there was only one person in my division, so now I have to fight some guys that are 5 or 10 pounds up. And I was like, oh, boo-hoo. Why don't you try being a girl? Because sometimes as a woman, you have to fight women that are much bigger than you all the time. So that sort of put me in a place where I decided that jiu-jitsu was going to be something more than a hobby. And I started working in jiu-jitsu in 2007 and received my black belt in 2008. And at that time, I had also switched jobs and started working in a different facility and sort of seeing how mixed martial arts and Muay Thai and all these different things started fitting into program management and direction. And I started thinking, I would really like to have my own academy at some point in the future. I was also co-directing women's grappling camps with Valerie Worthington and Felicia O, and that was an incredible eye-opener to see that there was all of a sudden a market where there never was one before. I mean, we never figured that we would have anybody showing up to all women's grappling camps, but we've consistently had 20 to 30 women showing up 3 or 4 times a year all over North America. So
from how far afield have they come?
We get women from, I would say, Toronto, other parts of Ontario. I think we've had 1 or 2 girls maybe from Quebec, and the vast majority of them will come from the United States, West Coast, East Coast. And what we're trying to do now is we're trying to branch out and bring the camps to other areas that we haven't sort of had a presence in. Sure. So it's been really wonderful. And last year I took the opportunity to come train at Marcelo Garcia's school because his wife Tatiana had reached out to me a number of times before, and I said, now's the time to take the plunge. And at the time, I was a little dissatisfied, I guess, with where my own training was. I felt like I wasn't progressing very much. And when I came here, that all really changed, and I found a really wonderful group of people that have helped me rediscover my passion for jiu-jitsu, not only as an instructor and someone in the community, but also as a student. I really enjoy being a student again.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who've given up learning now that they're an instructor,
yeah.
and it's kind of cool to be both. It keeps you enthusiastic. It's hard to fake enthusiasm.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing because sitting here and training with Marcelo, I get the opportunity to see a lot of high level training, high level instruction, and I admire the fact that someone like Marcelo is able to find different ways to push himself all the time. It's really difficult to do, and I think a lot of people, when they make that transition to being an instructor, they forget what it's like to be a student.
Well, can you give some examples of pushing yourself, both, I guess, from your perspective and from what you see Marcelo doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, I know that this is something that I love because there have been moments where I've gone through a lot of hardships or lost opportunities or opportunities that don't want to be created for me, and I've just gone out there and created them for myself. For myself, I've had to take ownership of my own training and my own choices, to go out there and seek what I want, and not accepting whatever's given to me. In a basic ways, like, competition training, sometimes I wouldn't have the opportunity to train with, the rest of the guys, or I wasn't big enough or whatever. And so I'd have to go run stairs or do cardio on my own. It was a very individual, solitary process. When I'm here watching Marcelo train, I'm constantly amazed at how he's evolving his game all the time. He has a very open attitude towards training, and he's very passionate about what he does. He trains with everyone. There are no boundaries. And I'm really impressed by that. I wish that more people chose to push themselves that way. He'll be doing something in training, and then the next day it'll show up as a lesson, or he'll play with things, and he goes home and he thinks about this a lot. And I think it's fascinating. It's wonderful to be able to be around and experience.
Let's change gears here a little bit. One question I get asked all the time is, Stephan, there's this big, strong, athletic guy at my club, and it's so hard to fight him because he's a football player. He can bench press 400 pounds. He's twice as strong as I am. He's heavy, and he just crushes me. I can speak to that to a certain extent because I've fought and competed against people who are 265, 280 pounds, but it's more of a rarity for me. I'm a pretty big guy, I like to think. I'm flexing right now. But you deal with this day in, day out. So strategically, what advice can you offer to people who are training and competing against bigger, stronger people?
I would look at it in 2 different ways. A white belt or a blue belt who's new to the sport and training or fighting against somebody that's that much larger is a very different scenario, I think, than maybe a brown or a black belt or somebody that's more experienced. And I say that because as a white belt or a blue belt, if you have training partners that are always that much larger than you, you do have to be careful because you don't have all the skills necessary yet to learn how to keep their weight off of you. So a lot of the times when I'm faced with this, growing up in my jiu-jitsu career, or when I'm faced with the question myself at camps or seminars, I tell a lot of people, you are responsible for your own safety and your own body. So first and foremost, if the larger person is just somebody that's just going to smash your head through the wall and try and hurt you, it's not really worth risking. So
don't train with them.
I would just straight up say don't train with them. Especially females sometimes, or smaller guys even. You have a battle of the egos, and even though somebody's outweighing you 100 pounds, if they want to really prove a point, they're going to. And it's
so they don't want to get tapped out by a girl,
or a little guy, or whatever it is. So it can be dangerous, mind you. If you have a much larger training partner or opponent that knows how to move and knows how to train, this can be a really great training relationship. So there's a sort of balance of the personalities there. Somebody that's a little bit more experienced.
Well, you and I sparred yesterday, and I think I only put your head through the wall once.
That's true, and I scrambled up your legs a few times. So, and I think for somebody that's more experienced, you have a little bit more leeway and a little bit more control over those types of situations because you do possess skills to defend. You do possess the skills to attack.
Can you give a very concrete example of, you said keeping a heavier guy's weight off of you. So I'm assuming, well, tell us what you mean. Give us a push with your legs.
Yeah, legs.
Elbow them in the face? What?
I think for myself, I would say legs are extremely useful. And the other thing that I've learned, or become more aware of, I should say, is grips, right? Marcel is a huge fan of grips, and it's the entry into everything that we do. So grips in conjunction with, use of your legs, whether you play a spider guard or you post them on your partner's hips, there's a lot of power there that can be generated that might not otherwise come from your hands, And I think one of the most fundamental mistakes I see people making is a lot of the times when you're faced with somebody bigger or somebody that's trying to play a top position, you see a lot of people just trying to push them away with their hands as opposed to using their bodies or, the power generated from their legs.
All right, so that's the theory. But now what kind of techniques do you actually like using? What technique do you really enjoy choking somebody out with if they're bigger and stronger?
One thing that I've been using a lot lately is, actually there's two. One is I've become a lot better at applying the bow and arrow choke. Marcelo has a beautiful way of gripping the collar that I think makes all the difference in making a much tighter bow and arrow choke. That is a great way because you're on top of them. The last thing I want to do is allow myself to get completely underneath them and have their weight sit on top of me.
Because then the choke doesn't work. You're getting squashed.
I call it beached whale syndrome sometimes, and it's not pleasant. So I always try to attack either from the top or the side. The other choke that I really enjoy is it's a choke that Fabio Gurgel had taught at a seminar here not too long ago, but it's a cross-side position choke where you take your own lapel and you bring it across your partner's neck, and then you sort of walk around in a clockwise motion. Okay. But a lot of these types of moves where you're able to sort of use your body weight to strategically pin your opponent down, I think those work really, really well. I've been trying to play a lot more guard, single leg X guard, and I have some success with it, but I think, again, it's something that you have to work on when your game is a little bit more technically developed. It's a tricky position, I think, for beginners to start out in.
So it's still a work in progress for yourself?
Work in progress, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the female thing, and I ask for a couple of reasons. One is that there's a growing number of women in the sport, and women are thinking about starting a sport who want your perspective on things that are unique female problems. And the other is there's guys who train with women who have no idea, and there's instructors who have women in their classes who have no idea about some of these issues. So let's get into some nitty-gritty about that. Right off the bat, how should a woman approach a jiu-jitsu class, and why on earth should she want to lie on her back and wrap her legs around somebody?
I don't know.
Come on, you can do better than that.
I think, safe to say maybe some female black belts are slightly crazy for doing it this long, but I think...
Present company excluded, of course.
Yeah, I think jiu-jitsu is a fantastic sport for females. I say to people all the time who have questions about it or are very new to it that it gives you a sense of self-confidence and strength that starts from within and goes, way beyond. It's not even hand-to-hand. I think having awareness over your body and learning how to be in control of your body is a great way to take ownership over how you're interacting with people, how you are present in the world.
All right, but why jiu-jitsu as opposed to Taibo or ballet or... Because that's still being in your body.
Yeah, it is. I would say the body contact is really powerful. You talk about how some people never receive hugs or don't know how to, make a handshake or put their arms around somebody. And regardless of whether it's a comforting motion or some sort of other body contact, it puts you in contact with somebody else's energy. And I think it's really important because it teaches you boundaries of, how to move within somebody else's field.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm trying to resist teasing you that the reason you're doing jiu-jitsu is you just want a hug. but I was thinking about this the other day, that just about every culture that I know of has a form of wrestling.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Switzerland last summer, and there was a big Swiss Schwingen, the type of wrestling. It's not nearly as kinky as it sounds, relaxed. Championship going on there. It's an indigenous form of Swiss wrestling. And I think it really is the oldest martial art, and it's something very primal. What about the sort of self-defense aspects of it? Like, promoted by movies, you see Angelina Jolie knocking out an army of robots or bad guys with spinning hook kicks, which is, I would suggest, somewhat unrealistic. But this is your interview, so why don't you talk a little bit about the connection between jiu-jitsu and self-defense?
Yeah, I mean, it's... I think when you look at the history of jiu-jitsu, it's often connected with the word self-defense. It is a defensive sport, a way of protecting yourself. But I think it's also evolved in many ways, and there's different ways that you can interact with it. Some women, and I think sometimes it's the best way to be introduced to jiu-jitsu. I mean, as females, we are not raised culturally to roughhouse that much, at least not in Western culture. Guys, you roughhouse from the time that you're born. It's common to sort of toss your friends around or roll around on the ground. Women are not typically raised to do that. I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen, but typically you're raised to like things that are pink and be a little bit more feminine.
Sugar and spice and all.
Yeah, all
things
pretty much. And I think when you have the aspect of self-defense, some people will find that word very appealing, very non-threatening, and very empowering. So it's a great gateway to have someone look at jiu-jitsu. Now, whether or not they choose to study it in a self-defense form and only focus on that, from the feed and a lot of the typical Gracie movements to taking it to the next level and maybe becoming competitive with it, I think that's something where women find a little bit more of a bridge rather than sort of jumping into a room full of 30 sweaty men that are all really competitive trying to tear each other's heads off. So, I think the history of jiu-jitsu and the role that self-defense plays is very, very, very important in how it's perceived by people and how it's introduced.
What do you think about this? There's another thing I've been thinking about recently. Often when I'm sparring with a brand new big guy, typically, you hold them down and you can feel the panic rising within them. And they try and bench press their way out of it. They hold their breath. And it's a claustrophobia thing. So that's when I roll with a woman, I don't try and freak her out by giving her claustrophobia. But when I'm rolling with a big, strong football player, sure, if that opportunity presents itself, I'm going to use that, because otherwise he's going to throw me across the room. So I have some firsthand knowledge of claustrophobia-induced paralysis. Now, from a female self-defense perspective, especially from an anti-rape perspective, do you think that there's much... It's a bit of a leading question, because I think I know what the answer is, but I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you agree with me. That developing that sense of comfort with the proximity allows you to think and move and respond in a way that your brain might just shut down if you weren't spending time with sweaty men wearing pajamas on.
Well, I mean, I have a really big problem sometimes with how things are marketed. Like when they say rape safe or self-defense for rape scenarios, or rape is a very strong word. And when they market a seminar that's going to be 2 hours on Sunday afternoon and they say, learn vital skills to protect yourself, have some self-defense, I think this is very misleading for anyone, really, regardless of whether you're male or female. If you're going to be attacked, that fight or flight response is instinctive. And
the adrenaline dump.
Yeah, it's paralyzing. And I've had an instance before I trained jiu-jitsu where a gentleman reached out on a subway platform and grabbed me around the neck, and I froze. I had no idea what to do. And I look back at that experience and I say, one of the powerful things again about jiu-jitsu is that having the regular body contact and being able to feel what it's like to push and pull and fight your way out of something, having that daily interaction really conditions you to be able to, I think, handle more threatening situations a lot easier, But again, this comes with years and years of practice, not 2 hours on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon.
Well, just to put things in perspective, Emily's fairly short, fairly petite, and I would put her up against a 200-pound muscle dude anytime, and I bet within a minute she'd have that guy drooling unconscious on the mat or on the pavement. So, I believe in the strength of the techniques as well. But I'm glad that we're talking about the psychological element. Now, being a woman training in up to now mostly male-dominated environment, has anything inappropriate ever happened to you on the mats?
Oh yeah, lots of inappropriate things.
Uh-oh. All right. Well, let's talk about them, and let's talk about what you did and maybe what you should have done. And from an instructor's perspective, because you're also now teaching at your own school in Princeton, New Jersey, what should they keep an eye out for, and how should they deal with inappropriate behavior, or when a female student comes to them and says, look, this guy was doing X, Y, Z. So talk about the X, Y, Z, talk about what you did, and talk about what an instructor should do.
Well, I'm going to say that, uncomfortable situations that I've had with men have generally been somewhat sexual. Right? So
during training,
and sometimes after training, I will say that it's a very limited thing. I don't think most men act this way. Getting to this point in my career, I've trained with 99.9999% males.
And that's thousands of people.
And we're limiting it to maybe like one or two strange experiences that I've had. But I think there's two different ways you have to look at this. You have to look at it from a male perspective and a female perspective. Actually, I shouldn't say male perspective. I should say somebody who's been training for a little while and somebody who's absolutely new to the sport. Someone who's been training for a while in the sport, I think, doesn't look at it as a sexual thing. Obviously, you can look at some of the positions in jiu-jitsu and say, wow, like they resemble a lot of other things that we do.
Usually in the privacy of our own home.
But someone who's accustomed to training jiu-jitsu doesn't think this way. You think about them in the technical positions that they are. Someone who's absolutely new to jiu-jitsu, and I've faced this many times with females, is when they are introduced to the sport and the class, whatever it is, they look at what's going on and they look at the various positions that you have to be in, and they do freak out a little bit because they say, wait a second, why am I going to let somebody sit in between my legs? Why am I going to let somebody sit on my face? Like, there's just a lot of very awkward barriers that you have to soften and work past. For any odd occurrences that may have ever happened to anyone of any gender, I think you always have to bring it back to respecting the sport and respecting your partners and understanding that you are choosing to engage in practice with someone, and that you should, appreciate that opportunity and not do anything to offend someone. Again, most people are going to be absolutely fine at doing this. They understand that barrier. For someone that does encounter something strange, I would say immediately the first thing to do is to disengage. So if it's a situation,
for example, let's talk specifics.
Okay, so for example, when I was a white belt, I had a partner who had gone into a cross-side position, and I felt a third knee.
Awkward.
I didn't know where it came from. So that kind of made me freeze a little bit because I was a white belt. I wasn't really, I didn't know what I was doing. So I kind of just stopped and looked at my partner and said, I think it's time for me to take some time off the mats. And they know, like perverts know they're being perverts. But nonetheless, it's good to put them on the spot a little bit. And after that situation, I addressed it with my instructor. And that person had the tendency from time to time to come and watch class and see if I was training. And if I was training, they would train. And if I wasn't training, they would leave. But my instructor knew some of the dynamic that was going on, and my instructor would forewarn me and say, look, such and such is, here, I think it's not safe for you to train.
They didn't kick him out?
No.
All right.
I think, and I should say in the instructor's defense at the time, I don't know him that well, but Looking back, I don't think it was a situation where he felt he needed to kick him out, because I think that he felt that the person would leave on their own, you know? Not to say that that's always the best way to handle it. Obviously, if that had happened to a female student of mine, or any student for that matter, I would say something, you know?
Okay. Let's move away from the explicitly uncomfortable situation and just talk about how you as a woman, what you would suggest to women who are going to try out this crazy sport. They've been talked into it by you. It's all your fault. What should they wear? What are some things that guys don't even think about when they go to class?
Yeah.
What should they wear? What should they do? How should they behave? That'll make them fit in more naturally and make it a pleasant and a productive experience.
So again, with this, I think there's a couple different ways that you look at this. There are women that will appear in jiu-jitsu schools that are looking for attention, and it's very obvious by the way that they dress. And so for anyone that's looking to begin the sport, I really suggest that you go in with somebody that you know, or if it's something that you're curious about, check the school out a couple of times. Go watch, see what the people are like. When you dress for class, if the instructor isn't already helping you with that, I think it's really appropriate for women to keep themselves covered. For myself anyways, the last thing I want is for anyone to sexualize me when I'm training or after training. When I train, I train. I love the sport equally. I don't want it to turn into something else. And I think that's where the lines blur a little bit, because some women, they don't realize when you wear a low-cut tank top and you have cleavage when somebody goes cross-side on you, or you're wearing, thong underwear and you go to pass the guard and somebody gets a really great look at your whale tail. I mean, it's not... on one level, for the other females in the class, it's disrespectful and sometimes very irritating, because once you bring that provocative element into the training, it sometimes changes the way the men in the class will look at you or interact with you as females, period. So what should you wear then? I think for women, a rash guard on top of your sports bra, or at least a fully covered shirt, something that won't allow you to pull your shirt down or something unusual to happen. I also think underneath it's appropriate to wear full briefs or spandex shorts or something that will cover you up, because the pants that we often wear, I double tie everything, but they're drawstring pants. They have holes on the side, and a lot of times you see people stopping in the middle of their matches to have to tie their pants up again. So I think it's just really important as females that you keep yourself covered, because again, it's there's a lot of body contact, and you don't want to put yourself in a situation where people think you're asking for attention, or where you're distracting people to the point where it's irritating for other females in the room.
Okay. What about hair and nails?
Cut your eagle talons, manicures, gel nails, whatever you got to do. I've never been someone that was into getting my nails done, probably because I started the sport when I was in my early 20s. Makeup, I think it's always good to have, your hair tied back, jewelry off, wash your face. That's the other irritating thing, when you get a girl with cake face makeup and you're trying to help her, and then her face comes off on your gi.
The Shroud of Turin effect.
It's an expensive, wash. You got to wash your gi a few times. So, again, I think it's about putting yourself on neutral ground and focusing on what you're here to do, which is to learn something. It's not a parade. It's not a fashion show. If you want to dress up, go do that on a different day.
Earrings, nose rings, tongue rings, other piercings.
For safety, you got to either remove them, or if they can't be removed, just tape over them. Make yourself safe. It's.
So you don't want it forcibly removed for those aforementioned bits.
I've never seen that happen, but I've definitely heard of people getting hoop earrings torn out by accident, or they have a belly ring and it gets hooked on somebody's belt and gets torn out. A lot of nasty things can happen. So we're not skydiving. You don't need helmets, but you do want to be appropriately uniformed for it.
Okay, so some girl or some woman comes to you and she says, I don't live where you live. I live in small town USA. What should I look for when I'm looking for a school? What advice would you give about school selection to a woman who's interested in sort of a little bit of self-defense, a little bit of self-development, maybe thinking about competing down the road?
I think 10 years later, it's a very different scenario than where I was before. I think the internet is more widely used. Jiu-jitsu is a more popular sport, so you have the luxury of being able to look online and research. So I would say look at what's in your area. There's a lot of resources. You can go to forums and ask questions on forums to ask, opinions of teaching.
Which forums?
You could go to, I guess popular ones would be like MMA.tv. People go to nhbgear.com. That's really popular on the East Coast. I think Sherdog and some people sort of mill about on ADCC, but it's easy to find resources where you can ask people in the community what their opinions are.
Hey, what do you think about instructor XYZ?
Or have you visited this school before? And I find that a lot of people on forums, when it comes to asking opinions about schools, there is a lot of talk about it because people want to be honest about the information that's out there. It's a pretty serious thing. Upon maybe shortlisting a handful of schools in your area, I'd say you do hand-to-hand visits at each school. Go check out the environment. Make sure that you're comfortable with the instructors, that you like the energy that's in the school. A school that's going to be MMA and Jiu-Jitsu is going to have a very different feel from a school that's strictly Jiu-Jitsu. Competitive schools will be somewhat different from maybe more self-defense oriented schools. So knowing what you're looking for is important and paying attention to everything that you see and everything that you feel. If you're looking at competing, is it important for you to know, does the school have a competition team? Is competition allowed? I mean, there's some schools where competition's really not looked as something that they want their students to do. So these things may come into play a little bit later on, but the last thing that you want, because when you start attending a school, you develop camaraderie with the students, you develop respect for your instructors and the staff. You don't want to have a situation where you feel like all of a sudden it's not the right fit for you, or you're not able to sort of find the things that you want and be fulfilled. And it's a very difficult thing to have to go through to change schools, whether by choice or not by choice.
What about the gi versus no? If your emphasis is sort of self-defense, self-development, where would you come out on the gi versus no gi versus training MMA debate?
Wow. I would say if you're strictly looking for, self-defense type stuff, I would say start in the gi. The gi is realistic in the sense that, okay, people say, well, am I going to be walking around or am I going to catch somebody wearing this bulky, heavy, sweaty outfit somewhere? No, you're not, but you're going to see a lot of people with jackets and jeans and, suits. They're all alternates for garb that we wear on top of our body. No-gi, I think, is fantastic. It's great, but it's also a little bit more reliant, I think, on athleticism, some speed. You also tend to sometimes attract a bit of a hybrid of a lot of wrestlers and MMA people. So the energy and the environment can be a little bit
or
intimidating.
macho.
Yeah, it can be. It can be. Not always, but it can be.
Aggro macho.
Yeah. And again, same thing with MMA. So again, it's sort of it's a matter of what you're really looking for. I think the self-defense brings maybe a little bit more of this feeling of traditional jiu-jitsu or traditional martial arts. And it could be a bit more comfortable for someone that's not looking for any heavy competition or anything down the road.
Okay, Emily. Well, that's been very, very interesting for me. I hope it's interesting for other people and inspiring for some women to see what you've accomplished, follow some of your advice to pursue their own journey. How do people get in touch with you if they want to train with you, bring you out for a seminar, go to your school, that sort of thing?
There's a couple different ways. My school's in Princeton, New Jersey, so I have a website there, princetonbjj.com. You can also reach me on my own website, emilykwok.com.
EMILY.
Oh, yes. That's very good, Stephan.
KWOK.
That's right. So EMILYKWOK. Grappling camps and that whatnot. We travel around the country. Our website there is womensgrappling.org, and that's a group of us. But for any sort of training information, all that kind of stuff, you can email me personally off my website, off the Princeton BJJ website. And you'll also find me quite frequently in New York City at Marcel Garcia's school, because I also work here with MG in Action, and I do all my training here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Podcast listeners, there's a pretty good chance that you're listening to this on your smartphone, right? You're walking around, you got your smartphone in your pocket, you got your earbuds in, you're listening. If you've got a smartphone and you do jiu-jitsu, then you should check out my free Roadmap for BJJ app. This is a video-based app. It's an app that goes on your phone. You can check out the different sections. It's got different techniques. It's got different positions. And it breaks down the big picture of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for you so that you're not going to be so lost on the ground when you're training. So you're going to know kind of, sort of what you should be doing in every position, along with the specific techniques that you should be using. So if you go to grapplearts.com/roadmap, there'll be links there to get this app for free, both in the iTunes store, if you've got an iPhone, or in the Android store, if you've got an Android phone. There's also Kindle versions of it out there as well. Once again, you can grab that at grapplearts.com/roadmap. That'll point you in all the right directions to get this app, whatever kind of phone you have.